Howdy, welcome to the Bremer Research Moment. I do have to apologize. It's been a bit since I produced the last one of these. Let's see, I've been ill. I have been teaching. I've been busy with work. So it just has taken a while to make this one. The interesting thing is one of the things that I've been doing is one of the things that I want to talk about. So in this episode, we're going to talk about several things. The first is conferences. The second is making tough decisions. And if we get around to it, we'll talk about a third thing, but I'll leave that for later on. So one of the things that I've been doing is conferences. When I joined MPD, I sort of went into what I call my conference coma. Prior to MPD, I'd been, if there was a conference, I was at that conference. I would speak. I chaired conferences. I participated on committees. I did all those things. But starting in about 2015, I was sort of done with conferences for a good 7-8 years. When I left Circana, the first thing I did, in fact, it was even before I left Circana, was I went back to the conference circuit. First one being SampleCon, which was a wonderful conference, although I did find we were still talking about the same sorts of things we had been talking about. But, and in particular this year, I've been on the conference circuit, going to multiple conferences. I do want to talk about something, though. There are too many conferences, just to be blunt. And it's not going to change because people go to all the conferences. But there are some downsides. So let me take you through the months of March, April, and beginning of May. So March was SampleCon. There was actually a few conferences right before that as well, but generally they were different audiences. But starting in April, you had Quirks, Insights Association, IIEX, and yet in the beginning of May, there's yet another Quirks over in London. So it's great that there are lots of opportunities for people to get out there and speak and to talk about new and interesting things they're doing, interact with other members of the industry. But there's too many in too close a time period. Even though my desire has been to talk where I could, I just couldn't go to all of them. I'm exhausted. If you guys know me, I really put my all when I talk to an audience. And for example, at Insights Association Annual, I got pulled into an unexpected panel on mentoring folks. Ironically, in qualitative, you do not think of qualitative when you think of me, but I use general principles to talk about how do we actually bolster junior members of the industry. I then had a paper that I worked on with Frank Kelly, some really good research on incentives that we presented. Then there was, and we'll get into this in a bit, the Insights Association is trying to think about how they should modify their code, their professional standards code, to include AI specific things. So we actually had a wonderful workshop. Shannon Danzy organized it. Now Frank, Ben, and I ran the workshop, illuminated where people were at, and I'm happy to say people have different opinions. Internally have different opinions on AI. They are both very excited for the opportunities that are out there, but also kind of concerned about some of the issues that could crop up. So that was wonderful. And then we had the closing sort of roundtable on that. So in 2 days, I was sort of everywhere in the conference, and that's exhausting. IIEX was the next week, and even if I had been scheduled to be at IIEX, I don't think I could have done it. But there's a huge downside to this. One, people are like me and they're not necessarily going to all the conferences. And let's be blunt, the conferences do have slightly different foci. And so you don't necessarily expect the same people there. The problem is there are two topics that are dominating the market research field right now. One is quality, the other is AI. And so you're having these disparate conversations. You're having a conversation at SampleCon, you're having a conversation at Insights Association, you're having a conversation at Quarks, you're having a conversation at IIEX. And those are wonderful things, except for we want to make real change when it comes to both of these. And by having separate conversations, they're not coming into one. I do have to tell a story. I am a huge advocate of SampleCon. This was not always the case, and Rachel knows this to be true. When I was at Toluna, we did not go to SampleCon. That was just sort of an internal unwritten rule. But I was on a lot of different things. And the other big sampling companies also did not, sample supply companies did not go to SampleCon at the time. And so there was one SampleCon that was held in New Orleans. I did not go to the event, but something we were doing with CASRO, because a lot of the folks who were participating in the CASRO initiative were at SampleCon, we decided to hold a meeting the day after SampleCon was over. And what ended up happening was there have been many wonderful things talked about, changes that people wanted to make and ideas people had that they were still talking about the next day when all the big sample vendors were there. And for various reasons, we were not in favor of the changes they wanted to make. And because we were big, we drove the field. So you spent your time talking about these things, and then the next day you're like, oh, we're not doing that. And it sort of dulls the momentum that people have. I give the example of the AI workshops. We're working really hard to build an industry standard on AI. And I think we've got some really good insight from the workshop, but we missed a ton of folks who chose to go to IIEX and Quarks instead because they were all together. And whereas we really had the initiative to get a ton of voices in the marketplace speaking about these things, we won't necessarily, we were successful among the people at IA, but we're going to be missing some voices. Now we're going to reach out and try and hit the main ones that weren't there, but it's also, the disparate discussions that are happening. I'm starting to notice this in the data quality initiatives. People have good discussions that don't include all the main actors. And so we've got things spinning up in different arenas. And at the end of the day, I'm going to be honest with you, we are not going to be successful if we're not together and we're not discussing it as one. So my message there is we need to spread out the conference calendar. And I know it's difficult. I know that the folks who organize these conferences are making money and they're getting people to come. But in terms of good for the industry, we really have to spread them out. I would prefer we had fewer conferences, but we may not. But if we're going to have conferences, don't have them week after week after week. So that there's at least a chance to relax, think about what was said at those conferences, and come back. So that's my curmudgeonly look at conferences at this point. I've definitely rested up, and there was a conference that I wanted to go to in June, I would definitely go to it, but not week after week after week. My second topic for this week is something that is often talked about at management level. What makes a successful senior manager, senior executive? I often hear the phrase, they can make the tough decisions. I'm going to go to somebody who just wrote a book, which was all about making tough decisions, and that's Christy Nome. And I'm not meaning for this to be political. What I'm meaning for this to be is an example. And she got a lot of blowback for the story where she took her 14-month-old puppy out to a gravel pit and killed the dog. And her explanation was he wasn't doing, she wanted him as a hunting dog, and he wasn't doing that way. He was acting up. He'd killed a chicken, there was contextual elements around there. But for those of us who, by the way, I am known as the crazy dog owner of market research. So, or the crazy dog person of market research. So you can understand where I come down on this. But it's also, she used that as an example of making a tough decision. She felt she had to do it, and she did it. Well, here's the thing. It was a bad decision. And I don't mean from the emotional standpoint. I mean, first of all, a 14-year-old puppy is a 14-year-old puppy, a 14-month-old puppy is a 14-month-old puppy. They are going to exhibit rambunctious behavior. They are going to exhibit an unease at times. You are responsible for training that dog. There are options other than killing the dog if you feel they aren't meeting the needs. But ultimately, that shows you are not doing your job if the dog is not what you need them to be. But instead of, she could have gotten rid of the dog, gotten organizations will take dogs and rehome them, things of that nature. So because the outcome was messy, because the outcome was difficult to comprehend, because she had to have a difficult conversation with her daughter afterwards, she calls that a tough decision. It was a bad decision. It may have been tough, but it was also bad. In business, we often have very similar attitudes. And again, often you're seen as a successful senior executive if you can make the tough decisions. I've always hated that phrase. And I've hated that phrase for several reasons. One of which is people internalize tough decisions as being able to fire or let go of somebody, things of that nature. I want to make the right decisions. I don't want to make the tough decisions. And I have a process by which I make decisions. There's always a point at which we can evaluate the decision and go back and do things better. But if you go through a process and you make good decisions, sometimes the good decision doesn't entail layoffs, and it doesn't entail other things that are not necessarily palatable, that are not enjoyable. I don't see those as tough decisions. I think if you have a good framework and you come to that naturally, the decision is, if you've got to have layoffs, it's because you're protecting the rest of your work staff. It's because of some other reason. And if that is the right decision, then that's a natural outcome. I also think on what they're calling tough decisions, it should always be hard on the person doing the firing or layoffs. I had this opinion since the very beginning. It should not be an easy thing to do. But if you've got the right framework behind you, then it's the right thing to do on that. But let me address the tough decision is not always the right thing to do. I'm a research person. There is actually a lot of research out there which shows that ill-timed layoffs are actually worse than if you did not make those decisions or take that decision. If your company is doing well and you're just trying to game the system for stock price advantage, you actually won't. It'll make you look good for a quarter or two. Sometimes there are short-term reasons that you do choose to do things. But in the long term, those decisions end up hurting the company as opposed to helping the company. If there's a downturn at the company and you really, after going through the decision matrix, that really is what has to happen. That isn't, included in this. Sometimes layoffs work, but you got to do them for the right reasons. So I wish we could banish the phrase "making the tough decision," and I wish we could banish that from hiring decisions at the senior executive level. It seems people, I've witnessed this, have a desire to prove themselves that they can make the tough decisions, so they go overboard, in making what's considered tough decisions. I am aware of one senior executive, won't name names, won't name companies, that won't promote to the senior level unless the person is willing to not tell the truth to a client if the truth is potentially painful for the company that they're at. That's absolutely the wrong thing to do and a horrible idea, but that's seen as making a tough decision. It's not the right decision, it's a tough decision. So at the end of the day, I wish we would rephrase things. People should become, senior executives should be good at making the right decision as opposed to the tough decision. There are things that we have to do as senior executives that aren't, again, palatable, that aren't things we relish doing. But if we have the right decision matrix behind us, we know why we're doing it, and we know that it's for the good of the business that we're ultimately doing that. So that's all I have to say there. Obviously, I was distraught at the Christy Nome story, but I found it interesting that she was portraying that as making a tough decision. It was the wrong decision. It was not a good decision. So there's that. The final thing I wanted to talk about is just completely left field. I've been teaching this course. I've enjoyed teaching the course at the University of Chicago. And one of the things that I've done, and I think it actually helps us as we think about data quality, is we've separated out the benefits of mode and sample source. So an visual mode, of which online and other digital forms have some real distinct advantages over audio modes, telephone, things of that nature. The sample sources associated with online can be really bad at times. And that's what we're struggling with in our data quality initiative. But there are some good ones out there. The incentive experiment that that Frank Kelly and I did, our sample was pristine. Now, I have to be honest, it may have been because it was Frank Kelly and I doing the experiment, and they knew just, there may have been a sample sent out that they knew would end up being pristine. It was really good. Now the company, and I do have permission to talk about them, Dynata has done some things in the quality space, which, if I were them, I would hang their hat on their ability to do quality research if this is repeatable. And that's one of the things I'd want to look at, is whether it was the John Bremer, Frank Kelly special. But at the end of the day, the sample was phenomenal. I've made a career in some sense out of understanding who are bad respondents who should not be in a survey. Out of 1,000 people, almost 1,000, we questioned 10, and we ended up keeping all 10 at the end of the day. Now there was some cleaning before we got to it, but not a huge amount. I think from what our final counts were in field, the only 13 additional folks were cleaned out. I could be wrong on those numbers, but it was phenomenal. But the key here is there are different levels, even for non-probability samples, of quality and firms that participate on quality. If you just link generically all online sample together and call it online sample, then the mode impacts, which are really beneficial from a visual medium, get washed away. And there's no differentiation between high quality and low quality. I will say we're seeing more and more firms who want to compete on quality. And I applaud that. I think that's fantastic. It's the way of going. We'll see where that takes us. I have told you guys before that there's going to be a price premium if we go, if we really are competing on quality, but that is what it is. Anyways, that's all I have to say for this one. It was just to get back into the swing of things. I have other things to talk about. We have guests coming up. I will start rolling. The quarter for the class that I'm teaching is over in 2 weeks. So I hope to get one out next week and the week after, but please understand if I don't. But we'll definitely go on a regular cadence after that. Anyways, thank you. And I hope you enjoyed this, and we'll talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.